Okay, this is to review Chapter Seven's quiz. Now, the first couple questions when you're practicing, you'll notice that you'll have to take a percent to a decimal. And whenever you're taking a percentage to a decimal, you always want to multiply it by 0.01. Or if you're taking a percent to a fraction, you're always going to multiply it by 1 over 100. But pay attention when it asks you to go from a percentage to a fraction. More than likely, it's going to ask you to make sure it's in simplest form. So let me go ahead and give you a couple examples. So if we had something like 3%, and they want that converted to a decimal, so we would take the 3 and multiply it by 0.01, and when you plug that into the calculator, you should have the value of 0.03. So that would be the answer for that. Now, what if we had to take a fraction or a percentage, 60%, and we want to convert that to fractional form? So the first thing you're going to do is, again, you have to multiply it by 1 over 100. So let's do that. So 60%, and we can put that over 1 times 1 over 100. Multiply across, you get 60 over 100. And we need to simplify that. So you can start with a 2 or 3 if you want. And if you use 2, you know that 2 times 30 is 60, and 2 times 50 is 100. And we can see our 2's, they reduce down to 1's. Okay? And we can see that with the 30 and the 50, we can take that down even further. We can get 10's out of that, because 10 times 3 is 30, and 10 times 5 is 50, and we can see the 10's divide out to 1. So this is our final answer right there. So 60% in fractional form in the simplest terms is 3 over 5. Okay, you also have a couple problems where you have to take a decimal to a percentage or a fraction to a percentage. It doesn't matter what type of number you have. If you're taking it to a percentage, you want to multiply it by 100. So let's go ahead and work on a couple problems. So if I had something like 0.078, and I want to find that equivalent as a percentage, you just take that number, 0.78, and multiply it by 100. When you plug it into the calculator, you end up with 7.8, and that is your final answer, 7.8%. Now, what if we have a fraction? Well, if we had a fraction like 13 over 25, you just multiply that by 100, and that becomes 13 times 100. That should be 1,300. And then remember, this is considered over 1. And then 25 times 1 is just 25. And when you plug that into the calculator as 1,300 divided by 25, you should have the result of 52. So that's your answer there. That's 52%. So for this first one, this was 0.078. And we converted it, and our answer is 7.8%, and our fraction is 52%. Okay, just to recap those few problems, whenever you're taking a percentage to a decimal, you want to make sure you multiply it by 0.01. Whenever you're taking a percentage to a fraction, you multiply it by 1 over 100. And anytime you're taking a decimal or fractional number to a percentage, you always multiply it by 100%. Okay, we're going to do a few of these type of problems where we're going to translate the equation, but we are not going to solve it. So again, be careful when you're entering your answers for your quiz or your test. If it says not to solve it, do not solve for the unknown. So if we're just going to translate that, looking over here in the red, remember anytime you see the word is, that means equals. And anytime you see the word of, that means multiplication. So let's go ahead and write this out. So 30% of, which means multiplication, what number, we don't know. So I'm just going to use the letter X for what number is, which is equals 36. There you go. We just translated it. So that's how you would enter it into the system. Okay, so we're going to try another one, which is translate, do not solve. And I made sure I include down here over in the red what number. We're going to use the variable X. So we start reading this, what number? So that would be our variable X is, which is an equal sign, 8% of is multiplication, 95. There you go. We just translated that equation. Here's our last one, to translate the equation, not solving it. We read what percent. I hear that word what. So I'm going to start filling it in as the unknown variable x. Of, which is multiplication, 60 is, which is our equal sign, 40. There you go. That one has been translated, and that's the way you would enter it into the system. Okay, now this problem we are going to solve. That's why it's very important to read your set of instructions. In your set of instructions for this particular problem, it will ask you to translate the equation and then solve it. So let's start by translating it. So what percent, so that's the unknown variable x, of, which is multiplication, 60 is, which is equals 40. Okay, now that I have it written out, I'm going to go ahead and solve for x. We know that x times 60 is the same thing as 60x equals 40. We know, we've learned in previous chapters, if we divide 60 out, that'll divide out to 1. And what we do to one side, we must do to the other. And we also know that 1 times x is just x. So x equals, and then what I'm going to do is, sorry, I started recording the wrong problem. So if I had editing tools, I would have cut that out. So this is the correct problem, which is 50% of 74 is what number? We're going to solve this one. Sorry about that. So let's go ahead and first translate it. So it's 50% of, which is multiplication, 74 is equals what number, which is x. Now, before I can start solving for the letter x, I got to make sure I convert this 50% to decimal. And remember, so I'm going to write it over here to the side, 50%. To get that as a decimal, we're going to multiply by 0.01. And then when you plug that into the calculator, you should end up with 0.50. So I'm going to write that 0.50 times 74 equals x. So if you just plug that right into the calculator, you should end up with a result of 37. So 37 equals x. And it doesn't matter what side the x is on. And that's your final answer for that. So most of what we've gone over so far is from section 7.1 and 7.2. Now that we're in 7.3, we're working with proportions. So again, we're going to translate and we're not going to solve. So we're going to translate 93% of 65 is what number using this equation over here in red. And this equation is for proportions. So A is for amount, B is for base, equals P is the percentage over 100. Now, when we're reading this, anything that follows the word of, which would be the base. So if you look over here, what's following the word of is 65. So that's going to be your B. Over here, we see 93%. So that's our P. That one's the easy one. Anytime you see a percentage attached to it, you know it's going to go right here in the equation. So let's go ahead and start setting it up. So this is my approach. I usually just draw the two lines. I know the 100% is going down here, and first I look to see if there is a percentage, which I see is 93, so I can fill that in. And the second step, I look to see if anything's following the word of, which there is, it's 65. So that means the letter A is our unknown. We just went ahead and we translate it using the proportion equation, and that's how you would enter it into the system. Okay, so let's go ahead and translate a proportion again. So the first thing I'm going to do is start setting it up. I know 100 goes down here below. I'm going to look to see if there's a percentage. Here's one right here. So I'll fill it in, 89%. And I'll look to see for this letter B if there's anything following the word of, which there is, 106, so that goes down below. And then my unknown is the letter A. So this is how you would translate it and enter it into the system. Now we have a problem in our set of instructions. It's asking us to simplify. So 18 is what percent of 50? Well, we're going to translate that and then we're going to solve for the unknown. Over here in the margin, remember the x will serve as our unknown variable. Of represents multiplication and is represents the equal sign. So let's go ahead and start writing it out. So 18 is, which is an equal sign. What percent? We don't know. That's our unknown. Of is our multiplication, 50. So I'm just going to rewrite that as 18 equals. And remember, 50 times x is just 50x. And we learned to get that 50 off of that, we divide it out. We know that divides out to 1. And what you do to one side, you must do to the other. And when you enter that into the calculator, you should have the result of 0.36 equals x. However, they want this as a percentage. So we got to go ahead and make sure we convert that. So remember, it doesn't matter what number it is. If it's a decimal or a fraction, always multiply it by 100 to get it into percentage form. So I'm going to take 0.36, multiply it by 100. When you put that into the calculator, you should end up with a result of 36, which is 36%. So that is our final answer, 36. Okay, you're going to have a problem like this where it's going to ask you for the food described, and you have over here your nutritional facts, find what percent of total calories is from fat. So, and you can see over here by the box, your final answer must be in percentage. So if you end up with a decimal answer, you're going to have to convert it at the end. So they're just asking you, out of this amount of calories, how much of it's from fat. So let's go ahead and work on this. So let's go over to the whiteboard. And I wrote it out. So what percent? So remember, this right here is what percent of total calories is from fat. And then here we go. We have our calories and our fat. So how do we write this out? Well, we're going to use a proportion, equation. So remember that equation is set up like this. We have A over B equals P over 100. So let's go ahead and start filling that equation in. So I'm going to set it up. We know 100 goes down here. It's asking for what percent, so that's my unknown. So I have to enter an X there. Now I'm going to go over, and the first thing for the B, remember anything that follows the word of, or it won't work that way in this problem, but this is another way to think of it. Whatever's in the bottom part, this is the whole amount, and this is the partial amount. So the whole amount of calories is 100. So the whole amount would go down here. And the partial amount is the fat, which is 35. So that's another way of looking at an equation in terms of percentages. The part on the top and the whole on the bottom. Okay, once we have that all filled in, we can go ahead and cross multiply in this direction and in that direction. And when we do, 100 times the x is just 100x. And then 100 times 35 is 3,500. And then now we're going to solve for x by dividing out 100. We know this divides out to 1. What we do to one side, we do to the other. And when you plug that into the calculator, you should end up with a result of something like this, 31.8181. Now, follow your set of instructions. If it asks you to round it to the nearest tenth, and I do believe that's how they're having you round it for this particular problem. So the nearest tenth, so the first thing I would say, okay, well, here's my 10th place, but I need to evaluate this number to determine if that 8 will count up or not. It's a 1, so it will not. So when I write my result, it is 31.8, and this is percent. So just remember, when you're in this type of problem, you won't have to convert this. Your final answer will be in percentage form. Okay, so this is the last problem I'm going to show on this part of, this is part 1, and this is the last one I'm going to show you. Now I'm going to continue on the part 2 video.